Canada is abandoning its climate commitments, and Donald Trump's trade war is the reason. While the world watches climate disasters unfold across the globe, Prime Minister Mark Carney just announced he's delaying Canada's electric vehicle mandate, essentially throwing environmental progress under the bus to appease Trump's economic bullying. We're talking about scrapping a requirement that would have made 20% of passenger vehicles sold in 2026 zero-emission vehicles. It's not just a policy reversal, it's a complete capitulation to Trump's tariff tantrum. So, what exactly happened? And why is Canada, of all countries, backing down from its climate leadership role? To answer that, we have to understand how Trump's tariff war is reshaping North American economics and forcing even progressive governments to make devastating compromises. Between 2015 and 2023, Canada under Justin Trudeau positioned itself as a global climate leader. The country committed to ambitious greenhouse gas reduction targets, implemented a federal carbon pricing system, and established the electric vehicle mandate that required escalating zero-emission vehicle sales targets. The plan was straightforward. 20% of new vehicle sales would be zero-emission by 2026, ramping up to 60% by 2030 and 100% by 2035. This wasn't just environmental policy, it was economic strategy, positioning Canada to lead in the growing global EV market. The automotive sector is Canada's second-largest export industry, employing 125,000 Canadians directly and nearly 500,000 in related industries. For a country looking to transition from resource extraction to clean technology manufacturing, the EV mandate was representing a crucial industrial transformation for the country's future.
The world is changing rapidly. The largest economy, the United States, is fundamentally reshaping all of its trading relationships. And we're moving from an age that lasted decades, an age when free trade was a motor of global economic growth, to a new age, an age of economic nationalism and mercantilism. You know, the U.S. tariff rate is now the highest it has been since the Great Depression in the 1930s. And these tariffs are being applied to all countries on nearly all goods. And the changes in U.S. policy go beyond tariffs. Countries now must in effect buy access to the world's largest economy through investments, through unilateral trade liberalization, and policy changes in their home markets. And all the while, the transformation of global trade is occurring against a backdrop of wider economic disruptions, of geopolitical realignment, of AI and other technological transformations, and the necessity, the imperative of a shift to a greener economy. What's going on is not a transition, it's a rupture, and its effect will be profound. Workers displaced from their jobs, supply chains that have existed for decades disrupted, companies forced to change where they find their materials.
The global context makes this shift even more significant. As the world moves away from free trade toward economic nationalism, Canada finds itself caught between competing pressures. The era of seamless cross-border commerce is ending, replaced by a new reality where trade policy becomes a weapon of geopolitical influence. But then Trump returned to power in 2025, and everything changed. What might surprise you is how systematically Trump has weaponized trade policy to force other countries to abandon their own domestic priorities. His approach isn't just about protecting American industry, it's about using economic leverage to reshape how other countries have governed themselves through economic leverage and coercion.
Okay, well, let's go to results. Right now, we have the best trade deal of any country in the world. Okay, those are results. We think it can be better, and we're working to make it better, but to be absolutely clear, 85% of our trade with the United States is tariff-free. Nobody else is in that position. Our average tariff is about 5.5%. That's the lowest average tariff of any country in the world. So right now we have the best, but we have real issues. Without question, we have real issues in steel, in aluminum, in forest products, in autos, potentially in pharma, copper, some other sectors. So there's these strategic sectors that the U.S. has focused on, where we have issues. And as well, there will be a review of CUSMA, our trade agreement with the U.S. and Mexico, starting next year. So we need to prepare for that. We need to lay the groundwork for that review, and we need to address as rapidly as possible these strategic sectors. Okay, so that's the overall context. So we're looking now, given that we've got the best deal, to really focus in on those strategic sectors and prepare the groundwork for that broader discussion on CUSMA.
Canada's position in this new trade landscape reveals fundamental vulnerabilities. Despite having what officials describe as the best trade deal of any country with the United States, with 85% of trade being tariff-free and the lowest average tariff globally, the relationship faces unprecedented strain. Real issues persist in strategic sectors including steel, aluminum, forest products, autos, pharmaceuticals, and copper that require urgent resolution. Starting in February 2025, Trump began implementing what he called reciprocal tariffs on Canada and Mexico, initially threatening 25% tariffs on all goods. The stated justification was border security and drug trafficking, but the real goal was economic dominance. By March, Trump had specifically targeted the automotive sector with 25% tariffs on vehicles and key auto parts. The administration's message was clear. Companies not investing in American manufacturing would face substantial penalties, creating what industry experts called the most disruptive trade policy in decades, according to industry analysts.
The concept is you would go back to your job, and you're not going back to your job if you don't keep your boss happy while you're gone. So the implication is he will vote as the president instructs him to vote. Now, there is a legal question about whether he can just take a leave of absence. The Federal Reserve Act says Fed officials cannot have any other employment, any other job. Does this count? We don't know. We don't know if somebody's going to bother to sue or not, since it's only for a couple of months. But it is an interesting proposition that he could be breaking the law to serve the president. We'll find out.
Trump's semiconductor tariff announcement exemplified this strategy perfectly. Speaking to tech executives, he promised fairly substantial tariffs on chip imports, while exempting companies building in America. This wasn't about fair trade, it was about forcing global supply chains to bend to American demands. The impact was immediate and devastating. Canadian auto production, which had been recovering from pandemic lows, suddenly faced massive new costs for both exports to the U.S. and imports of American components. This wasn't because Trump was suddenly concerned about Canadian environmental policy. Rather, the automotive tariffs created a perfect storm that made Canada's EV mandate economically impossible to maintain. The tariffs hit the industry in multiple ways simultaneously. First, Canadian automakers exporting to the U.S. faced 25% additional costs, making their vehicles less competitive. Second, many vehicles assembled in Canada use American components, meaning the tariffs increase production costs even for domestic sales. Third, the integrated North American supply chain, built over decades under trade agreements like NAFTA and USMCA, suddenly became a liability as parts crossed borders multiple times during manufacturing. Some components cross borders multiple times, like wire manufactured in the U.S., sent to Mexico for bundling, then back to the U.S. for installation. Each border crossing now potentially triggered tariff costs. The Canadian Vehicle Manufacturers Association and other industry groups began intensive lobbying to eliminate the EV mandate, arguing it would cripple their companies and put thousands of jobs at risk. But the real pressure came from the numbers. Industry analysts estimated that Trump's tariffs created a headwind of up to $110 million per day for the auto industry, with Canadian manufacturers particularly vulnerable due to their integration with American supply chains. The big three American automakers, General Motors, Ford, and Stellantis, all have significant operations in Canada, and they face the impossible choice of absorbing massive tariff costs or passing them on to consumers already struggling with affordability. With EV sales already declining due to high prices and limited infrastructure, adding regulatory pressure to hit specific sales targets became economically untenable. Carney's announcement on September 5, 2025, represented a complete strategic retreat. Speaking at an aerospace company in Mississauga, he didn't just delay the EV mandate, he fundamentally reframed Canada's relationship with climate policy. We have an auto sector that, because of the massive change in U.S. trade policy, is under extreme pressure, Carney said. The EV mandate adds to the liquidity issues they have, the financial challenges these producers have. They've got enough on their plate right now, so we are taking that off. But this wasn't just about helping the auto sector. Carney explicitly acknowledged that Canada can't rely on our most important trading partner like we once did, describing the situation as not a transition, it's a rupture in the global economic order. The EV mandate delay was part of a broader $5 billion strategic response fund and new Buy Canadian procurement policies designed to reduce economic dependence on the United States.
Strategic response fund to help Canadian businesses adapt, diversify, and build that new economy. This fund has three core objectives. First, to help businesses pivot to new products and markets. Secondly, to retrain and retain skills and production here in Canada. And thirdly, to make our businesses globally competitive. So businesses can use these funds to invest in the design of new products, to retool their plants to boost productivity, or to offset the costs of accessing new markets. And the fund will be open to all sectors, given the fact that the tariff impacts are wide-ranging across Canadian industries. La priorité sera accordée aux projets issus des secteurs les plus touchés par les tarifs, comme l'acier, l'aluminium, l'automobile et le bois d'œuvre. Les fonds de réponse stratégique travaillera en étroite collaboration avec nos.
The Strategic Response Fund represents a comprehensive effort to help businesses pivot to new products and markets while retaining skills and production capabilities in Canada. Available to all sectors affected by tariff impacts, the fund allows businesses to invest in new product design, retool plants, boost productivity, and offset costs of accessing new markets. This massive investment signals Canada's recognition that the old trade relationships are permanently altered. The strategic implications extend far beyond electric vehicles. Canada's decision to abandon its 2026 EV target represents a fundamental shift in how climate policy intersects with trade relationships. For decades, environmental advocates argued that climate action and economic growth could be complementary. The Canadian experience under Trump's tariffs suggests that when faced with immediate economic pressure, even progressive governments will sacrifice long-term environmental goals. This creates a dangerous precedent for other countries facing similar trade pressures. If Canada, with its strong environmental movement and relatively stable political system, can be forced to abandon climate commitments, what does that mean for less economically secure nations? Environmental groups were quick to condemn the decision. Keith Stewart from Greenpeace Canada asked, "What was the point of electing Mark Carney when we get Pierre Poilievre's climate policy?" referring to the conservative leader who had long opposed the mandate. "We should be aligning with Europe, which is doubling down on renewable energy and electric vehicles, rather than bowing before Trump's attack on people and planet." The criticism highlights a fundamental tension in Carney's approach. While European countries have maintained their climate commitments despite trade pressures, Canada chose economic appeasement over environmental leadership.
People are less afraid of tariffs and Trump.
Leger's polls are consistent with other public pollsters and also with internal government polls obtained by Global News through an access to information request. And they all show the economy, not Trump, is now top of mind among the majority of Canadians.
Over the summer, Canadians talked to us about the cost of living issues, which is front and center in the minds of Canadians.
Public opinion data reveals the political calculations behind this decision. Multiple polls, including those from Leger and internal government surveys, show that Canadians are now less concerned about tariffs and Trump than about domestic economic issues. The cost of living has become front and center for most citizens, overshadowing international trade disputes and environmental concerns. This decision positions Canada closer to Trump's anti-climate agenda rather than the global consensus on the need for rapid decarbonization. But the automotive sector's problems reveal a deeper vulnerability in Canada's economic structure. The country's heavy dependence on trade with the United States, particularly in integrated supply chains, has become a strategic weakness that Trump is exploiting systematically. Canada imports about 8 million vehicles annually, with 50% being imports, and the average domestic content of vehicles assembled in North America is estimated at only 50%. This means that any disruption to cross-border trade immediately affects both vehicle availability and prices. Trump's tariffs aren't just changing trade flows, they're forcing a complete restructuring of North American manufacturing. Canadian companies are now choosing between maintaining integrated supply chains that maximize efficiency and creating domestic capacity that reduces trade vulnerability. The broader economic impact is staggering. Carney announced that unemployment in Canada has reached its highest level since 2016, outside of the pandemic. The government's response includes not just the EV mandate delay, but expanded employment insurance, worker retraining programs for up to 50,000 people, and billions in support for affected industries. Canada is also launching a $370 million production incentive for canola producers after China imposed 75.8% tariffs in response to Canada's 100% tariff on Chinese electric vehicles. This creates a cascade effect where trade disputes in one sector trigger retaliatory measures that affect completely different industries. Canadian farmers are paying the price for automotive trade policy, while automotive workers are suffering from broader geopolitical tensions. The timing couldn't be worse for global climate action. 2025 was supposed to be a crucial year for accelerating the transition to electric vehicles, with multiple countries implementing similar mandates and the technology finally reaching cost parity with gasoline vehicles. Instead, Canada's retreat sends a signal that climate commitments are negotiable when faced with economic pressure. This undermines international climate negotiations and gives other countries an excuse to delay their own transitions. If a wealthy, technologically advanced country like Canada can't maintain its EV targets due to trade disputes, how can developing nations be expected to make similar commitments? Trump's strategy is working exactly as intended. By creating economic chaos through unpredictable tariff policies, he's forcing other countries to prioritize immediate economic stability over long-term strategic goals. The automotive tariffs weren't just about protecting American manufacturing, and they were about demonstrating that Trump could force policy changes in other countries through economic pressure. Canada's EV mandate delay proves that this approach is effective, potentially encouraging Trump to apply similar pressure on other policy areas. We're seeing the emergence of what could be called tariff diplomacy, where trade policy becomes a tool for reshaping other countries' domestic policies. The Canadian auto industry's vulnerability also reflects broader changes in global manufacturing. The integrated supply chains that made North American automotive production efficient and competitive are now a liability in an era of trade wars and economic nationalism. Companies that spent decades optimizing for efficiency are now forced to optimize for resilience, often at much higher costs. This represents a fundamental shift from the globalized economy of the past 3 decades toward a more fragmented, regionalized system where political relationships matter more than economic efficiency. Canada's decision to delay the EV mandate is just one example of how this new reality is forcing countries to make difficult choices between their long-term goals and short-term survival. Looking ahead, Canada's retreat on climate policy could have lasting consequences for the country's position in the global clean energy economy. While European and Asian countries continue investing heavily in EV technology and infrastructure, Canada is essentially putting its transition on hold. This means Canadian companies may fall behind in developing the technologies and supply chains that will dominate future automotive markets. By the time Canada resumes its EV transition, other countries may have established insurmountable advantages in battery technology, charging infrastructure, and manufacturing capacity. The short-term economic relief from delaying the mandate could lead to long-term economic disadvantage as the global economy continues its inevitable shift toward electrification. The broader lesson is that Trump's trade war isn't just about economics, it's about power and the ability to force other countries to abandon their own priorities. Canada's EV mandate delay represents a victory for Trump's vision of American economic dominance and a defeat for international climate cooperation. As other countries watch Canada buckle under trade pressure, they're learning that maintaining climate commitments in the face of American economic warfare requires either extraordinary domestic resilience or alternative economic partnerships that reduce dependence on U.S. trade. The question now is whether other countries will follow Canada's example of climate retreat, or whether they'll find ways to maintain their environmental commitments despite American pressure. Thanks for watching. If you want to see how Trump's tariff war is reshaping global trade relationships, check out our other videos. And if you want to stay updated on how trade policy is undermining climate action worldwide, be sure to subscribe for more in-depth analyses and breaking news coverage.